Good morning. We are in 2 Kings. I show we left off right at chapter 11. We've been talking about, or we talked about last week, Jehu. Very interesting fella. He didn't mess around. So Jehu took out the line of Ahab, just as was prophesied that Ahab's line would come to an end. Jehu reigned at the end of chapter 10 there, 28 years. Now you get into chapter 11, and this is going to shift back to the southern kingdom, Judah. And we find out here Athaliah is going to usurp the throne. Remember, Jehu he has taken out all kinds of people, and one of those was Ahaziah, the king of Judah. So he kills Ahaziah. When you get into chapter 11, I've been talking about Jehu. Now it shifts what happened after he killed Ahaziah. Well, Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, when she finds out her son is dead, she rises quickly and destroyed all the royal seed, all the royal descendants. She's got a plan here. She wants to destroy all the heirs. That makes her the queen. And so she's after all of the potential heirs. Now, a lot of times kings, we've talked about this before. It's one of those things that's recorded in Scripture, but when you read in Matthew 19, Jesus goes back to the beginning, and he says, from the beginning it was not so. God made them male and female and said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. He doesn't say they, like 20, shall be one flesh, but you read this a lot in the Old Testament where sometimes people had multiple wives, even concubines. And I don't know if you recall, but I think it was a Q&A question one time. Somebody asked, what's the difference in a wife and a concubine? And usually it was kind of a semantic difference, but it was more to do with social class. A lower class lady would be a concubine, still considered a wife. Then the higher would be what's just referred to as a wife. But sometimes they would have multiple wives. You saw with Ahab. Ahab had 70 sons that Jehu went after there in chapter 10 and had them execute them. So we don't know how many Ahaziah had, but she's after all of them. And it's interesting, this is one of several cases in Scripture, at least 3. I was trying to think if I could come up with any more, where somebody sought to kill a baby and a particular child, young child. And you think about how differently things would be in history and in Scripture had any of these been killed. What are some others you can think of? I think about Moses, Jesus. Those were the 2 I came up with besides right here, Joash. Joash is, by the way, the name of this king that's going to escape death just as a young child. But can anybody think of any others? I feel like maybe there are more, but I can't think of any right off the top of my head. Maybe that's it. But you think about in any of those cases, how differently, of course, in the case of just Jesus, everything changes, obviously. But with Moses, not Herod, but yeah, it wasn't just Moses, that's right. And a lot of we don't have a record, only, I guess we get to heaven and ask God when we get there to find out how many other male children actually were killed. Throw them into the Nile River. That was what, I keep wanting to say Pharaoh. That was what Pharaoh had decreed. All the male babies, we're going to kill them. I don't know how many of those young Hebrew babies, male babies, died because somebody actually did obey the commandment. But we know at least one lady refused, and that, of course, was Jochebed, the mother of Moses. And again, how differently things turn out if Moses is killed. But here's Joash, and Athaliah, she's getting rid of all the royal seed. She wants to set herself up to be the queen. Jehoshaphat, the daughter of King Joram, though, this is verse 2, sister of Ahaziah, this is his sister, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons, which were slain. And they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. He was hid with her in the house of the Lord 6 years, and Athaliah did reign over the land. Now, we sometimes talk about the number of kings in each kingdom, and sometimes you may recall I've made the statement before, there were 19 kings in Israel total, 19 kings in Judah, but there was also one usurper, and that's Athaliah. So for 6 years, she's usurping the throne. She sets herself up as queen. You know, it's interesting to me. I read this, and I don't guess. I think I could probably make an educated guess, but we don't know for sure. Did she go looking for Joash? And she's saying, "Now I know there's one more. Where is he?" And she just assumes, well, they've gotten him away, and they're scared, and they're going to just keep him away. And did she constantly live in fear of that? I don't get that indication. I think this is an educated guess, just based on how everything plays out. I get the impression she has no idea. Maybe she just sends an order. Maybe somebody comes back and doesn't want to say, I didn't fulfill the order. And so he says, sure, yeah, they're all dead. Maybe they didn't realize. Somehow it seems, though, that Joash sort of slipped through the cracks. Because I think if she had known, especially knowing that she's usurping the throne, I think she's going after him nonstop. She's searching. And you know, he's hidden. It's not like he was sent to another country. You know, when God tells Joseph, there are people seeking the child's life, God sends Joseph and Mary into Egypt, right? God providentially looked after Moses. Pharaoh's daughter comes down there. She has compassion. She sees Moses, and she says, I'm going to take this child. I'm going to raise him up like my own. She kind of adopted him, we might say. But you don't read about this with Athaliah. She's not, just tearing apart Judah looking for him. He doesn't go into another country. He's right there in Jerusalem the whole time. So it would seem to me she has no idea. I don't know if somebody just lied to her about, yeah, sure, we did everything. We got them all. And she thinks she's sitting pretty to be the queen for an indefinite period of time. But you don't get the idea that she's constantly looking over her shoulder like, where is he going to come back into the picture? You get the impression from the text that she has no clue. Whatever the reason or whatever the case, Athaliah reigns 6 years, and in the 7th year you have Jehoiada. He's the priest. He sends and fetches the rulers over hundreds, captains and the guard, and he brings them to the house of the Lord, the temple. He makes a covenant with them. Takes an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and he shows them the king's son. So he brings these people together, and you can imagine he says, we sort of laugh, people calling to meetings, you're probably wondering why I've called this meeting. So he probably says to them, you're wondering why I called this meeting. Well, maybe he signals to somebody, go ahead and bring him out. And out comes this child, and he says, this is the king. This is Joash. He's the rightful heir. And it's time for us to do something about wicked Athaliah. He was no doubt waiting until the child got at least old enough to be set on the throne. Now, of course, he's very young here, but he's got Jehoiada's help. Jehoiada is going to be kind of what's the word? I'm struggling with, I can't think of words today. What do you call that when someone's reigning for another? Somebody help me out. No. Someone reigning for another. There you go. Like a proxy or something, yeah. Retainer, maybe. There was a word that's, anyway, it'll come to me later on, probably right after class. But yes, someone reigning for another. Thank you, Captain Obvious, Billy Bridges. I appreciate that. But yeah, he's going to reign. I don't know if I'd even say reigning for him, but he's with him. And he's helping guide him because obviously a child, there's going to be times when he's not going to have the maturity, he's not going to have the ability to make these important decisions. So he presents the king here in the temple. Then he commands them in verse 5, saying, here's what you're going to do. The third part that enter in on the Sabbath will be keepers of the watch of the king's house. The third part shall be at the gate of Sur, and a third part at the gate behind the guard. So shall you keep the watch of the house, that it be not broken down. We don't want anybody to come in here and you find out that he's here and just decide we're going to raise this thing to the ground. 2 parts of all you that go forth on the Sabbath, even they shall keep the watch of the house of the Lord about the king. You'll compass the king round about, surround him, every man with his weapons in his hand. And he that cometh within the ranges, let him be slain. If anybody comes within your range, they die. And be ye with the king as he goeth out and as he cometh in. The captains over the hundreds did according to all things that Jehoiada the priest commanded. And they took every man his men that were to come in on the Sabbath. With them that should go out on the Sabbath came to Jehoiada the priest. And so that's basically what happens here in the next several verses. I won't read all that for time, but they bring forth the king's son in verse 12. He's surrounded with these men. They've got their weapons in their hand. They put the crown upon him. This is kind of the critical moment because they're going to crown him as king, and that's when he's most likely, somebody's going to find out about this. If they're going to make a move to try to assassinate him, this would be it. So they put the crown upon him, gave him the testimony, and they made him king and anointed him, and they clapped their hands and said, God save the king. You read this in Scripture, this would not be applause like we would think of it. This is sometimes you'll see this when there's shock, when there's dismay, they sometimes it says of Israel or Judah when they're going to go into captivity that people will clap the hands at them. It's the idea of just, man, this is so bad. Well, here it's the exact opposite. They're excited. Wow, the king. He's been alive all this time, and so it's just it's great excitement. It's not so much what we would think of as clapping the hands over and over, as it is just an exclamation. When Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, so she comes to the people into the temple. And when she looked, behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the manner was. And the princess and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew with trumpets. Athaliah rent her clothes. It's a sign of great distress, mourning. And she cried, treason, treason. Anybody else find that ironic? I mean, hello, you're the one that killed children so that you could take the throne by treason. And she's got the nerve to rend her garments in such, indignation at this treason. Funny how people are sometimes, isn't it? But Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds, officers of the host, and said unto them, have her forth without the ranges, and him that followeth her kill with the sword. For the priest had said, let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. They laid hands on her, and she went by the way by the which the horses came into the king's house, and there was she slain. So Jehoiada makes a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. Well, so Joash is anointed. He's crowned. And Athaliah hears all this commotion. She figures it out. She cries out treason, tries to flee, but she's killed. And now you have a period here, verses 17 down to the end of the chapter of Joash's reforms. I was going to say Jehoiada. It's Joash as the king, but Jehoiada is the one who is counseling him, and he's helping him because he's very young at this time. So the people of the land, they go into the house of Baal. They break it down, his altars and his images. They break they in pieces thoroughly, slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. The priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord, took rulers over hundreds and the captains and the guard, and all the people of the land. They brought down the king from the house of the Lord and came by the way of the gate of the guard to the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the kings. All the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet. And they slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. 7 years old was Joash, alternate spelling, when he began to reign. You know, we often talk about the boy king, and who are we usually talking about? That's a different boy king. Now somebody tell me, because I just lost it. Josiah, thank you. I just went blank myself. Thank you, Sister Peggy. I was sitting here, if y'all thought, well, he's waiting a long time to give us the answer. It's because it left me too. Josiah, thank you. Josiah is the one we often talk about. He was 8 years old when he began to reign. Here's a king who began to reign when he was 7. You know, sometimes people say, well, Josiah reigned on his own when he was 8. I probably in a sense, but let's not kid ourselves. He had some help. You can imagine I understand an 8-year-old boy in that time probably had a lot more maturity than an 8-year-old boy now. I mean, I just think of some of my own children, and you give them a throne and authority. Wow. I mean, you know, that's scary. But I understand they were probably a lot more mature in many different ways. But Josiah undoubtedly would have had help as well. Here with Joash, or again, Jehoash, same person, it's just an alternate spelling. We're explicitly told he did have help and who it was. It was Jehoiada, the priest. And this is, you know, when you stop here at the end of chapter 11, it's just kind of, you're just like, man, all's well that ends well, right? Happy ending. And it's just, it starts off so sad. This lady, she's murdering children, setting herself up to steal the throne, and she manages to do so for about 6 years. And then, man, Jehoiada comes along, steps up to the plate, crowns the king, takes care of Athaliah, and everything is great. But, you know, unfortunately, that's not the end of this. By the way, some commentators have speculated that Jehoash, you know, Joash versus Jehoash, it may be that Jehoash is the name he chose to be called by as he got older. I'm all grown up now. I'm my own man. I'm not Joash anymore. You know, it's kind of like sometimes a kid may grow up and get older, and he says, hey, look, I'm not Tommy anymore. I'm not little Tommy. You call me Thomas. Or I knew a young man back when I was college age, and I was probably about a junior. Well, I did 2 years of preaching school, so I would have been like 24 at the time, but I was about a junior in college, and his name was Timmy. He always went by Timmy, and he was getting ready to start his freshman year of college, and I was teasing him one day, and I said, look, I think you've gone about as far as you can go with Timmy. I think you need to update this and have something. I said, how about we just call you T-Bone? And I said, that sounds tougher, and you can go into college and you can be T-Bone from here on out. And I don't know, it didn't catch on with him, but for the rest of the time that I knew him and talked to him, I called him T-Bone. But, you know, I don't know if that's what happened with Joash or not, but some people have speculated that maybe that's what the deal was, is that as he got older, he decided to go by like a different variation of that name. But it's the same person, and hopefully you realize that as you read this. Verses 4 through 16. You've got the 7th year of Jehu. Joash is beginning to reign. He's going to reign 40 years. Of course, he's going to reign a long time because he starts at a very young age. But Jehoash did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. Again, everything's still great. High places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense in high places there, verse 3. But sometimes you see kings that turn to God and the high places are not taken away, it says. And this is the difficulty once a nation heads down that path. You have a leader that starts leading them down that path. You can make reforms. You know, you might have, I don't know that we'll ever see the day that it happens, but you might have a faithful Christian elected president. And he's going through Washington and he's trying to make these sweeping reforms and all this, but you know, the people within each individual state and county and city, they might be rotten to the core. And so, you know, you see this sometimes in the kingdoms of Israel. Of course, all the kings in Israel were rotten, but you see this in Judah, rather, where sometimes you had good kings, but they didn't always get down to a man in the country following God. But the king was trying during this time. So verses 4 through 16, you see these temple repairs. He says to the priest, bring in the money of the dedicated things, and we want to repair the temple. All the money that cometh into any man's heart to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priest take it to them, every man of his acquaintance, and let them repair the breaches of the house, wheresoever any breach shall be found. Well, no doubt the house has been broken down because this is talking about the temple, of course, because it's been neglected. But it was so in the 23rd year of King Jehoash, 23rd year of Jehoash, that the priests had not repaired the breaches of the house. So he calls Jehoiada and the other priests, and he says, why are you not repairing the breaches of the house? Now therefore receive no more money of your acquaintance, but deliver it for the breaches of the house. It's interesting. Money is set aside for this. A period of time goes by. We're not told how long, by the way. It'd just be speculation to try to guess. But a period of time passes. It's not done. So this is in Joash's 23rd year. So he's old, a little bit older now. He's got some maturity. So now he calls the priest in, Jehoiada, and says, what's up? He calls him in to give an account. What's going on? Why is this not done? I don't think from reading this that you don't get the impression that Jehoiada is wicked. In fact, nothing from any of this account would indicate that Jehoiada is wicked. If anything, he's a faithful servant of God. I don't know exactly what's going on. It just seems that he didn't get this done. I've read some commentators that speculate, well, he's just not a man of take charge and get things done. That's just kind of not his personality. Well, I thought that too at first, but then I went back, I remembered back in chapter 11, because who's the one that took charge and says, everybody meet here in the temple, and he says, hey, here's the king. Now here's what we're going to do. You go over here, you go over here, you go over here. Hey, if anybody comes within your range, they're going to be executed. We're about to crown this man king, and I'm going to see to it that he's put on the throne. That sounds like a kind of take charge kind of person, doesn't it? I mean, maybe not take charge, but he understands when he needs to step up. Here, he didn't get it done. I don't know why. And I guess, we can spend too much time trying to speculate, but at the end of the day, we're just not told. But it doesn't seem it's from being evil. I don't think there's any kind of wicked intention here. But sometimes, some of you have either a business or folks that work under you that you supervise. Sometimes you have to sometimes you got to light a fire, don't you? I mean, you ever have that where you work in supervising people and they're not bad workers. They're not lazy. They're not just trying to collect a paycheck. But sometimes we can get complacent. Sometimes we can get comfortable in a routine or whatever. And sometimes you got to light a fire, don't you? And I remember there were times at GBN that sometimes we would get that way, and we had good people. But sometimes we got comfortable, and maybe we call a meeting or something and say, guys, I remember one time we had some of the guys that were kind of, some of our video editors, they were a little bit frustrated because we were going to call a guy in, like a contract thing, to come in and kind of do a consult, you might call it, and help them with some things. And the guys kind of took offense to that. They took umbrage that somebody's going to come in and show us how to do our job. I mean, I think we know what we're doing. We've been here for a year, after all, right? And some of them were just kind of, and they weren't bad people. They weren't trying to be rebellious or whatever. They just kind of, like I said, they took a little offense at that. And I remember at one of the meetings that Jim called around that time. Jim was the program director at that time, Jim Dearman. And he calls a meeting, and we get in there, and we had this kind of a conference table in the room where we did our meetings, production meetings and such. And Jim came in there, and I noticed he was carrying in his hand one of those things that those kind of rectangular sponge scrubbing things that you use to clean dishes. And he comes in, and he starts the meeting off, and he sets that right in the middle of the table, and he says, gentlemen, this is a sponge. And he went on to talk about how we need to be sponges. We need to absorb everything that we can and learn and understand that I don't know everything. I may be good at my job, but I don't know everything. There's always somebody who can come along and teach me something better. He may show me a shortcut. He may show me a better way to do it. And I can learn from them. And so he says, be a sponge. And it worked. The guys changed their attitude toward it, and everything was great. The guy came in and he taught them a lot. In fact, when he was gone, they were all saying, wow, that dude knows his stuff. And I'm glad he came in because we learned this and we learned that, and we can do this faster and we can do this better. So maybe that's what happens here with Jehoiada. I don't know. But Jehoash calls him in, he lights a fire. And he says, why are you not repairing the breaches of the house? Verse 7. Now therefore receive no more money of your acquaintance, but deliver it for the breaches of the house. The priest consented to receive no more money. So the priest said, okay, no more money to the people, neither to repair the breaches of the house. But Jehoiada, the priest, took a chest, bored a hole in it, in the lid of it, set it beside the altar. On the right side as one cometh into the house of the Lord, and the priest that kept the door put therein all the money that was brought into the house of the Lord. And it was so, when they saw that there was much money in the chest, they would empty it, put it in bags, and told or counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord. So they gave the money being counted into the hands of them that did the work, that had the oversight of the house of the Lord, and they laid it out to the carpenters and builders that wrought upon the house of the Lord, masons, hewers of stone, to buy timber, hewed stone to repair the breaches of the house of the Lord, and for all that was laid out for the house to repair it. Howbeit there were not made for the house of the Lord bowls of silver, snuffers, basins, trumpets, any vessels of gold or vessels of silver of the money that was brought into the house of the Lord, but they gave that to the workmen and repaired therewith the house of the Lord. So now that he's lit a fire, they get to work. They didn't reckon with the men either, verse 15 says, into whose hands they delivered the money to be bestowed on workmen, for they dealt faithfully. They didn't have to worry about these guys, how they were going to use the money. They were faithful. The trespass money and sin money was not brought into the house of the Lord. It was the priests. Now it's going to shift a little bit here in the next couple verses to King Hazael of Syria. He's going to head toward Jerusalem. But Jehoash, or Joash, here he's starting to waver a little bit here. He doesn't, as Hezekiah later will do, he doesn't turn to God and say, God, help us. Here's the king of Syria headed toward us. He wants to conquer us. Help us, Lord. He decides instead to bribe him. He goes up, Hazael does, and fought against Gath, and he took it, and he set his face to go up to Jerusalem. So Jehoash, king of Judah, took all the hallowed things, the holy things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own hallowed things, and all the gold that was found in the treasures of the house of the Lord and in the king's house, and sent it to Hazael, king of Syria. And he, Hazael, went away from Jerusalem. He doesn't go to God for help. Instead, he gets everything he can find. He starts, modern day example might say somebody's trying to pawn off everything just to come up with some cash to say to the king of Syria, here, take this, please, just leave us alone, have some money. And Hazael, at least for this time, says, okay. And he leaves him alone. Verses 19 through 21, you have the death of Joash, the rest of the acts of Joash, all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Boy, is there more there. We'll talk about that in just a second. And his servants arose and made a conspiracy and slew Joash in the house of Millo, which goeth down to Silla. For Jozachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, smote him, and he died, and they buried him and with his father, in the city of David. And Amaziah, his son, reigned in his stead. If you want to read more about him, you can go to 2 Chronicles 24, 15 through 27. It tells the rest of the story with Jehoash. I told you, when you get to the end of chapter 11, you're just kind of, man, this is great. He survived this attempted assassination as he was just a baby, and now Jehoiada the priest makes him king, and he's reigning, and he's building up the temple, he's repairing the temple, and he's doing all these good things. And come to find out, when Jehoiada the prince, or the priest, dies, Jehoash falls away. And how sad that is, that sometimes our faith gets too much grounded in another person, doesn't it? Have you ever seen a situation where an individual falls away from the Lord and other individuals fall away as well? Sometimes that can happen with a preacher. Sometimes a congregation can fall apart because a preacher leaves or falls away from the faith. Or sometimes maybe people that really, really looked up to that preacher. I'm not saying it's bad to admire someone. It's not bad to look up to a preacher. It's not bad to look up to any individual, as long as we keep that in the right perspective. My faith is in God and His Son. My faith is not in any individual. And if everybody else falls away, that's heartbreaking. That's terrible. But I'm determined I'm going to heaven. And I'm so determined I'm going to heaven that if the rest of the world chooses, you know what, we don't care about God, we're just going to do our own thing, then I hope and pray that I would be so determined that I would still follow God and go to heaven. Too many times our faith, and it seems somewhere along the way, Joash, his faith got to be more in Jehoiada than anything. And boy, that 2 Chronicles 24 is heartbreaking, because this whole thing. In fact, let's go there just a second. I hate to talk too much about it without actually going over and looking at it. I don't think we're ever told 100%, but it certainly would seem to be. 2 Chronicles, what did I say, 24, right? Yeah. And if you'll look at verses 17 and 18. By the way, Billy, can you grab Matthew 23 and just hold your spot there? I'll come to that in just a moment. I don't want to run out of time. 17 and 18 of 2 Chronicles 24. Now after the death of Jehoiada came the princes of Judah and made obeisance to the king. Then the king hearkened unto them. And they left the house of the Lord God of their fathers and served groves and idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this their trespass. Well, I have a question in my notes. Did Joash influence the princes or vice versa? We're not told explicitly. They may have influenced him to become idolatrous, or his faith may have been just 100% so much in Jehoiada, or he's just following God because that's what Jehoiada wanted to do. And after all, he did bring me up just from a child. And then when Jehoiada's gone, he's like, I'm going to do my own thing now, and maybe he influenced the princes. I think probably they influenced him, but I don't know that for sure. But this all comes to a head here in 2 Chronicles 24. God sends prophets to him to bring them again to the Lord. They testified against him, but they would not give ear. The Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest. This is Jehoiada's son. This is the man that saved his life. This is the man that protected him. This is the man that made sure he was put on the throne and helped him. And his son, Zechariah, comes, stood above the people, and said unto them, Thus saith God, why transgress ye the commandments of the Lord, that ye cannot prosper? Because ye have forsaken the Lord, he also hath forsaken you. And they conspired against him and stoned him with stones at the commandment of the king in the court of the house of the Lord. Thus Joash the king remembered not the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done to him, but slew his son. And when he died, he said, The Lord look upon it and require it. What a sad, pitiable end for this king that started off with such promise. I mean, Jehoiada saved his life, literally. And he's so determined to follow his idolatry that when he's rebuked by Jehoiada's son, he says, kill that man. Every time I read it, it makes me sad. It seems that Jesus references this. Billy, you there in Matthew 23? Jesus is talking about what's going to happen to Jerusalem. He's prophesying AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus under Vespasian with the Roman armies. And Jesus makes a statement in verse 35. Listen to what he says. That on you this Jewish people, may come all the righteous blood that is shed. And he goes all the way back to Abel. And he says, you recall God said of Abel, Cain says, I don't know where my brother is. Am I my brother's keeper? And he says his blood what? His blood cries out from the ground. He says from Abel all the way to Zechariah. Scholars are not 100% in agreement that this is the same Zechariah, but there is, he's called here the son of Berechiah, but sometimes people are called by a grandfather's name, his son of, and I mentioned the grandfather, sometimes it's the son of their immediate father. So it works. It could be that this is the same Zechariah. If so, Jesus is saying all this righteous blood that you have shed, righteous people. Of course, you recall right here in our text there in 2 Chronicles 24, he says, the Lord look upon it and require it. And Jesus says it's all going to come, we would say in the South, the chickens are all going to come home to roost. And it did. It came back on them in AD 70 when the city was absolutely leveled by the Romans. The temple was leveled. Jesus said and prophesied it, and it happened that way. He said there won't be a stone left on top of another. And it's all because of the innocent blood that was shed. How sad that Joash goes from the way he began to the way his reign ended. And it would seem, as Robert pointed out, that we're not told 100% for sure, but it certainly does seem that the conspiracy against him was a judgment from God for his wickedness. And so,
But does that say that they were accountable for all those people that had died? Or is it just saying that the judgment will be pronounced on you for all of them?
he's pointing out the Jewish nation as a whole. How often, in fact, are you still there, Billy? I think it's right before that. Well, I'm going to go over there too because I got to make sure I get the right verse. Because not long before that, before he makes that statement, no, it's after, sorry. Right after he makes that statement, he says, verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Then he says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. You refused. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. He's making the point here, I keep sending, in fact, back up to verse 34, wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you shall kill and crucify, and some of them you shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city. He says these people, they kept rejecting the ones God sent. And for the most part, they rejected the one God sent, the anointed one, the Christ, the Messiah. And that was sort of what we sometimes say, the straw that broke the camel's back. And he says there's going to be a reckoning. And he says this is not the first time. It's not that God is being hasty in this judgment. This has happened since the days of Abel all the way down to Zechariah, whether that was this Zechariah in 2 Kings or not. He says it's been going on for a long time, and you even rejected the very Son of God. And he says there's a price to pay for that. And so God cut ties 100% with the physical nation of Israel in AD 70. That's why all this premillennial idea, well, we need to make sure we protect Israel's interest over there because that's their land. That's God's people's land. No, that's God has severed ties with the physical nation. I'm not saying we shouldn't politically align with them because they're a lot more favorable to what we want to do as children of God than the Islamic states. But we should support it for political reasons, not religious, if that makes sense. But regent, that's it. Thank you. Sometimes that's the word I was looking for a while ago. Jehoiada served as a regent. Yes, thank you. You saved me. All right, we'll pick up, Lord willing, in chapter 13 of 2 Kings next Sunday morning. We'll have a break before our worship period.